introduce the show again.
All right.
But and in case I forget, but what I'd like for you to do is to look at these two personalities within the context of all the things that you've studied about them and writing your book and books and et cetera, and to look and to examine those two individuals, Dr. Martin Luther King and Adam Clayton Powell, and point out whatever the similarities or difficulties and et cetera, whatever you want to talk about. But I think that that would be good to end this, because these are the two most important individuals in terms of contemporary black society and the institutional church. You see, and I'd like to know more about about this myself. You see. And so when we come back, we'll do that. We'll do this. We will have, excuse me, we'll have 10 minutes to do this. I need some water myself. Yeah. Okay, very good. Thank you. Now, Herbert Marbury.
Yes, that's it.
Okay, well, I have to do that every time. You're giving us some excellent, and I don't want to make any noise. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. Herbert Marbury from Vanderbilt University, and he's giving us some information in reference to African Americans and the institutional church. Doctor, let's see if we might be able to pick up during this final segment to talk about what I consider to be two very, very significant individuals that you've already mentioned, Dr. Martin Luther King and Adam Clayton Powell. And let's see what you know about those individuals and how they fit into what we're trying to do at this particular time.
Right. Well, in the chapter on the Civil Rights Movement, I take up Dr. King and Adam Clayton Powell as a pillar of cloud and fire. Dr. King as a pillar of cloud, and and Adam Clayton Powell as a pillar of fire. And when I say pillar of fire, I mean someone who kind of brandished, if you will, his brashness, a boldness, a certain radical nature. Adam Clayton Powell was very clear while he was in Congress that he called himself the baddest Negro in Congress.
Yeah, go on.
Right. and he flouted the rules. He didn't stomach segregation. He didn't take kindly to the kinds of conventions that made African Americans second class. And part it had to do with his upbringing, had to do with who he was, but it also had to do with, I think, growing up in Harlem. And he really was, I call him, a son of the Harlem Renaissance. He was the new Negro, as I understand it, that the Harlem Renaissance writers had hoped for. He started one of the first boycotts of the public transportation system in Harlem. One of the first sort of public service programs at his church at Abyssinian Baptist Church. And by the time he went to Congress, he was pastoring the largest Protestant congregation in the nation. Adam Clayton Powell is known for his he's not only known for his pastoral work, but he's known for the Powell Amendment, which was a little known sort of codicil that he would add to every bill that sent funding for public accommodations. And it was a bill that said that public funding could not be used for segregated institutions. It angered Southern segregationists throughout the country, but it also angered African Americans, because some of those schools were African American schools in the South. Although they were segregated, they were starved because they also needed the public funding. But Clayton Powell didn't care. What he was concerned about was ensuring that those who wanted segregation had to pay for it. And so he starved them all to death until he was able to get the Civil Rights Bill in 1964. That was his victory in the Civil Rights Bill of '64. He was there when Lyndon Baines Johnson signed it, but so was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And King, who was, now they were both princes of the Black Baptist Church. Adam Clayton Powell had gone to, attended school in New York. His father, his father in many ways had groomed him to be a prince of the Baptist Church. Martin Luther King,
as Dr. King,
as Dr. King's father.
Good.
His father pastored Abyssinian, while Dr. King's father pastored Ebenezer, and they both groomed their sons for the roles that they would take. They both went to elite schools, Morehouse College in the South, and they both were products of the black middle class. But where they differed, I think, was Dr. King grew up in the segregated South, born right at 1929, just as America was going into the Great Depression. And Dr. King saw a different and a brutal side of white segregationist power. And it was something that I don't think Adam Clayton Powell saw. That shaped Dr. King in a way that that Adam Clayton Powell didn't.
And led to his assassination.
Yes, and led to his assassination. Absolutely. In a sense, both of them were assassinated. Dr. King, literally.
Good.
Adam Clayton Powell was politically destroyed because of his brashness. So what I find with now. Both of them come at a time when African Americans have migrated, and I think this is also important to make the making of these two figures. African Americans began to migrate immediately after the Civil War. Every 10 years, you look at the census, you see more and more African Americans migrating toward the west and toward the north. Except for the 10 years during the Depression, when you don't see much migration, but you see, and so African Americans migrated from rural communities in the South to cities in the South like Montgomery and Atlanta that created the possibility for a Montgomery bus boycott, but also created the possibility for an Abyssinian Baptist church, which was Adam Clayton Powell's political base, and which became for Martin Luther King the base for the Montgomery bus boycott and Ebenezer. And so as these two figures began to interpret the biblical text, they thought of the Exodus story for Adam Clayton Powell. The Exodus story guaranteed for African Americans in his sermon, "Stop Blaming Everyone Else," which he preached at Abyssinian Baptist Church in the 50s. It was a sermon that invited African Americans to fully participate in what it meant to be a citizen, take responsibility for what it meant to be a citizen.
He really pushed African Americans.
He pushed African Americans to take responsibility for it. And so for Martin Luther King Jr., however, there was a different way of understanding the biblical text. Martin Luther King Jr., growing up in the South, personal piety became very important. In as much as his political work, personal piety became a mask, if you will, for Martin Luther King Jr. He knew that if he was leading African Americans out into the streets to demand full inclusion, he knew how to use the television cameras, how to use the public square, and the way he used it was to lead African Americans into acts of personal piety. That's what I call the pillar of cloud. He masked, in many ways, his real intentions. He would lead them to pray in the streets, to sing songs. And when the television cameras came and they saw African Americans living out some of the, these kind of virtuous virtuous expressions, right? Singing church songs, praying, holding hands, praying for their enemies. Not only was the South was embarrassed, the nation was embarrassed, but they were not only embarrassed domestically, they were embarrassed internationally. And so I call that the pillar of cloud, because just as a cloud kind of blends in seamlessly, Martin Luther King's tactics blended in with the American moral landscape. These were virtues for America.
And this was also Dr. Martin Luther King behind the veil.
Yes.
And you know more about that because of one of your professors, I'm sure.
Dr. Baldwin.
Dr. Baldwin,
Right,
he talked about
right.
that and et cetera. And I think that you're an excellent reflection in terms of what he said about that and some of the things that you're saying about that. And I want you to know that the information that you're giving us now is very, very precious. Right. And I think that understanding these two individuals and some of the things that they faced and how different they were, one from the north and one from the south, but yet and still they had the same commitment, and while they went about it differently, they had the same commitment in terms of the uplift of African Americans to eventually reach the promised land. And I think that that's what we're still trying to move toward.
That's what we're still trying. That's what I hope that as you read my book, but as we think about biblical interpretation today, we face police shootings of Black and brown, African American and Hispanic, unemployment, high underemployment, and